Okay, you guys, something like earth-shaking happened to me last week, and I don't feel like I can overset it up, because when you hear it, you'll your head is going to fly off your shoulders. I think. I mean, the people I've shared it with so far, that's been the consistent reaction, and it's certainly my reaction. But I feel like I shouldn't tell that story yet, because I feel like you got to give people at least 5 minutes to show up. So
let us earn it.
So there's a story on the way. But meanwhile, I'll tell you a couple other good stories. Okay?
Now we're stuck.
Yeah, no. I promise you, you
Sold
won't be disappointed. I promise you. So, but let me tell you another couple of stories on the way, because this sort of I'm going to use that as a jumping off point for another idea, but it falls into another category as well. So let me tell you a couple of stories that lead into that category, and so there will be some coherence to this shmooze. Okay. So a lot of people want to know, what do you do with coincidences? Are you one of those guys that coincidences happen to?
All the time.
Okay, so then you're going to appreciate
Meaning
this.
hashkafa pratis?
Hashkacha pratis, yeah.
Okay.
What do you do with it? So here's what a lot of people do with it. They go like this: what are the odds? or can you believe it, right? And then their brain doesn't know how to process it. God here is doing something very intentional, and then we're not walking away with something, One of the things I heard Rabbi Franz say one time was by the Avinu Malkeinu. One of the things that in the whole checklist, it's sort of like on the second half, maybe 2/3 in, it's please God, let us not leave you empty-handed. So we don't want to leave, God is doing something, and we're leaving empty-handed if all we're doing is saying, what are the odds, right? Do you hear what I'm saying? Okay, so let's get really practical about the highly impractical, because when these things happen, they're so impractical. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a story. Just one example of this in my life. There is a book that I'm reading. Actually, I'm learning a new sefer by this same holy Rav. His name is Rav Yitzchak Isaac Chaver. He was in the school of the Vilna Gaon. Just this amazing Kabbalist, brilliant, one of these people who knew the whole Torah, and lived about 200 years ago. And I'm reading this, I'm learning this sefer of his. This was a bunch of years ago. And then I found out he's got other Sfarim. He's got other Sfarim. And so I ordered as many Sfarim from him as I could. And then they arrived, and I was sitting in my chair, and it was such an emotional experience. By the way, the commentary that I was learning of his was called Or Torah. So I would think of him as Or Torah, right? So when these books came, the new Sfarim, I was alone in my sort of study area in my house, and I put them against my chest, and I gave them the biggest hug. I was so happy to have more Torah from him. And then while I was doing that, the phone rang, and my daughter runs into the room. She's about, I don't know how old she is at this, maybe 10 years old. And she says, the phone's for you. And I said, who is it? And because we have caller ID, she says, Or Torah.
What?
That's what it said on the thing, Or Torah.
Wow.
He died about 200 years ago, right?
That's crazy. And you picked
It's
up
crazy.
the phone and he said, stop squeezing me so hard?
Yeah. You remind me of a joke. Steve Wright, you know who that is? Steve
Sure.
Wright? Yeah. Classic stand-up comedian. He had these one-liners that were very deep. He said, there's a light switch in my house. I turn it on and off, nothing happens. I get a call from a woman from East Germany. She says, cut it out.
That's a weird story, by the way.
Hey, yeah. So what do you do when coincidences happen? That's the topic. That's an example. I've got a lot more stories like that, but I'll just get to the point. So, there's an expression that I heard in English, which is that that when a coincidence happens, that's like God waving hello to you. Right? So I like that. I thought that was good. Because there's, you feel the truth of that. But then I thought about it, which is that every moment of the day, every moment of your life, God is waving hello to you. So if then that's the case, then what's the difference between a coincidence and every other moment in the world? Because something additional is happening that's not being acknowledged. Okay. So then I thought to myself, you know what it is? It's true God is waving to you every single moment, but now he's going, so to speak, out of his way to make himself known. That's really what's happening with a coincidence. God is going out of his way to make his presence and his closeness known to you. And then I thought to myself, that means that it must be, when a coincidence happens to you, it must be what we call an eis ratzon. An eis ratzon is a time of closeness. It's a time of favor. And when there's an eis ratzon, that means that the gates of heaven are open to prayer. And I thought to myself, that's the answer. It took me, by the way, it took me years of thinking to come up with what I'm telling you right now. Years of trying to break this problem. And I realized when a coincidence happens to you, that means that you should pray. Because God is going out of his way to show you how close he is to you, which means the gates are open to your prayers. So that is the practical take home. That's the practical take home. Anytime a coincidence happens to you, pray. Now, let me tell you how to pray, okay? That might sound chutzpahdik, like I'm going to tell you how to pray. But you'll see what I mean. There are 5 categories that I think, at least 5 categories, that everyone should have in mind all the time. And anytime you cry, by the way, the gates are open. Tears are like these amazing mystical things that they're like these angelic things that have they're like keys with wings on them that open up gates on high. And if you are shedding keys with wings, you better use them. You better use them for more than yourself. Anytime that you cry, and I'm telling you a big secret here, a big yesod in terms of avodas Hashem right now. Anytime that you cry, that means that you have an opportunity to pray for other people. And to relieve maybe the suffering or whatever it is, to really answer, help get other people's prayers answered. So here are the 5 categories. You ready? You know how many people need jobs? There's so many people who need parnasa. So you've got to have people in mind on your list, on your parnasa list, okay? People need parnasa. You know what else people need? People need a shidduch. There's so many people who need shidduchim. You should have a list in your mind of people who need shidduchim. So that when these eis ratzons come, when these moments come, when you can pray, that you're right there. You're right there. You're right there. When they do the mishaberachs and people show up with the list, and the list of the rabbi, that's got to be you. That's got to be you. But not just with the refuah shlema, which is, let's say, the 3rd category. Okay, what are the 3 categories so far? Parnasa,
Job,
marriage,
shidduch, and
health. Okay, that's 3.
having children.
Children, exactly. So many people are davening, please God, send me a boy, send me a girl. Mm-hmm. And by the way, in that category of children should also come Yiddish and Nachas, right? Because, it's not so easy to raise a frum kid. A lot of kids, they run after the world and they're off the derech. So, and despite the best of your intentions, So davening for children and Yiddish and Nachas is one and the same, okay? That's another thing. Mashiach has to be a regular, idea in our heads. And I'm going to talk about Mashiach more a little bit later when I tell you this next story. Okay. And then, if you want to continue to daven, here's some other things that should just roll off your tongue. Shalom bayis. People really need shalom bayis. And by the way, Reb Shlomo said, listen to this definition. People think shalom bayis is, I'm not yelling at you and you're not yelling at me. He says, that's not shalom bayis, that's a ceasefire. Shalom bayis means that the Shekhinah is in the house. It's a much more exalted standard. Right? Like God is between you. Like you look at your wife looks at you, God is between you. So that's Shalom Bayis should be another one that gets rattled off, right? Here's another one. You ready? Simcha Rabbah. We need Simcha Rabbah. The Ari says that the exalted levels that he reached were due to Simcha. You can reach levels that are tantamount, close to prophecy through Simcha. So, okay. So now I'm going to get to this thing that happened to me. All right, everyone hears it? Let's just review that point. If something happens to you, a coincidence happens to you, that's God going out of his way to show you how close he is, which means you've got to do what? Pray. All right, does anyone want to attempt all 8 categories? Or neither. Anyone? Just yell stuff out.
Parnosa,
What do you got? Parnosa?
Children, marriage, simcha, shalom bayis,
Mashiach, health, Yiddish and Nachas.
That's your 8.
Yeah. Did we leave out any?
Simcha Rabbah.
Simcha Rabbah. That means great simcha, great joy. All right, so now I'm going to tell you a story. And Danny was here for it. Danny was not at the time of the story, but right after the story. So here's the story. Okay, to tell you this story, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to tell you a crazy story leading up to the story. How do I know this guy? Because this is also one of the most way out things that ever happened to me. I wrote for a show years ago. Maybe you saw it, called Third Rock from the Sun. Okay, it was a popular show back in the day. Anyway, so there was a junior writer on staff. He had just joined the staff, and he'd come into my office and he'd ask me questions about Judaism. Right? He had hair down to here. Nice guy. And then we talk maybe 5-10 minutes, then he'd leave. Maybe after the 3rd or 4th time he came in, I kind of got it into my head. He's got to read this story by the great Argentinian writer, Borges. Now, if you don't know Borges and you read fiction, check him out, because he writes these short stories that are like meditations on infinity. Not Jewish, but was way into the Kabbalah, by the way. And actually, I know someone who met him one time. He was also, and he said he was blind. And this guy told me, he said, I used to, when he was on his sickbed as an old man, I would go to his bed. Now, he's one of history's great authors. And I would read to him my poetry. Right? This is like a balabus, like reading his poetry to William Shakespeare. And I said, what did he say? And he said, how is it that such a nice man writes such terrible poetry? So anyway, Borges is truly way out. And he has this story. And I thought to myself, my friend should read this story. Just based on a couple of our Torah conversations. What's this story? It's called Pierre Menard, author of Quixote. Pierre Menard, author of Quixote. Now, what is this story? It's a fictional character that Borges comes up with named Pierre Menard. And Pierre Menard wants to write the book Don Quixote by Cervantes, a book that's already been written and he's already read. But he wants to write it. But he hasn't read it in a long time. But that's his goal. And so he dedicates a chunk of his life to writing and rewriting and rewriting and rewriting till he finally, in the end, writes that which has already been written. He actually writes exactly Don Quixote by Cervantes. And Borges, who's making up this whole story, declares Pierre Menard's Don Quixote far superior.
That's great.
So, anyway, I thought to myself, my friend's got to read this book, right? So I had never been to his house. To his office. He was new on the staff. I walk into his office. He's not there. And what do I see sitting on his desk? A book of short stories by Borges.
No. She's crazy.
And then I walk up a little bit closer and I see there's a pencil in the book. And I'm like, okay. And I open up the book and the pencil's on the first page of Pierre Menard, author of Quixote. Now, how do you explain that? How do you explain it? The word Borges, the name Borges, never came up in our time together. Never. I had never been in his office. We had really just met. God at work, right? I knew at that moment, by the way, that he was going to become frum. Not only did he become frum, he moved to Jerusalem and got Orthodox smicha.
Why did you know?
How did I know at that moment? Because I had just witnessed a miracle. That's a miracle. That's the most obscure. What could be more obscure than Pierre Menard, author of Quixote? And it's literally sitting on his desk with a pencil to the page of it. I mean, there's no way of explaining that. So I understood something supernatural was going on in terms of my relationship with him. And that had to mean it was going to result in Torah. At least that's what I thought, and I was right. So anyway, that brings us to the story I want to tell you, which is that his eldest son, they live in the Muncie area now,
Oh, wow.
and his eldest son was having a bar mitzvah. And I'm like, I'm definitely flying in for that, right? And his son now, I mean, you want to know how much Torah, just how Torah spreads? His Torah had a siyum of Gomorrah at his, in addition to like all the other things he was doing. So, anyway, I land, actually Rabbi Brander went too, we were both on the same flight. We land, he had arranged for a car for us. We went to the Shiner Shul, if you know where that is, in the Muncie area. We davened there. Then listen to this. My friend lives 6 minutes from the shul. I didn't know that. And I get out my Uber thing because I'm on my own now, and I write in his address, 20 Pomona Lane. Okay, it's in the woods. He lives actually in the woods. Get in the car. It's a young driver from South India. Okay, nice guy. So he says to me, 20 Pimenta Lane. I said, no, 20 Pomona Lane. He goes, oh, okay. And it was the red eye. I flew in last Thursday night. I'm exhausted. And I fall asleep. And I wake up a half an hour later in another county. He says, we're here. I look up. Now I know, because I've been to his house. He lives mamish in the woods, not like with a couple of trees. In the woods he lives. I'm on a suburban street. I'm like, this isn't the place. He said, yeah, 20 Pimenta Lane. I said, no, I said 20 Pomona Lane. He goes, oh, okay. So I'm like, you got to turn around. So he turns around. Now we're on it like a hill, like in a, like one of these LA hills with houses, you know what I mean? And then you drive like about a block and then you're on the main road. You know what I'm saying? So we get to the main road and I see a sign that says Valhalla Cemeteries. He drove me to my parents' gravesite.
What?
Wow.
Wow.
Do you understand? I was asleep, and he's driving me to my parents' gravesite. I had no idea that where I haven't been in a few years. I said, you drove me to my parents' gravesite. And he's like still driving. I'm like, stop the car. I'm like, stop the car! Because he's still driving. He stops in the middle of train tracks. Like smack in the middle of train tracks. I'm like, what are you doing? You're in the middle of train. Just go, go, go. So he goes, and then I'm like, stop the car. And he drives into the cemetery, and I'm like, wait here. And I knew the general area, and I call up the office, and there's a woman, talking to me. I'm like in the middle of the cemetery. I tell her my parents' names. She says, what tombstone do you see? I say, it says Mishkan. She says, which Mishkan? Now I'm looking at the foot on the ground. I'm like, Sadie. She's like, okay, Sadie Mishkan. Okay, take a right. So I turn right. She says, now walk for a while. What name do you see now? I told her the name. She goes, okay, turn left. So I'm getting directions by the names of the dead. Do you understand? And then I see my parents' tombstone. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that this was happening. Like, how could this be happening? And so I was trying to describe it to some people, and these words came to me, which is that the impossible happens in real time. The impossible happens in real time. And I'll try to just explain it a little bit better. It's like, and it's funny because the example that I'm going to give hasn't probably happened to you. It hasn't happened to me. So to make this more relatable, this experience, I'm going to give you an example that hasn't happened to either of us. But imagine you've got like a super lotto ticket, right? And you're like, okay, 6, 6, 14, 14, 22, 22, 36, 36, 48, 48, mega 18, mega 18. It's like, a moment ago you were doing whatever you were doing, and now all of a sudden the impossible has happened in real time. It's this seamless continuity into like another place. And so I'm taking pains to try to describe this to you because I think this is going to be how Mashiach comes. Do you understand? It's also going to happen in real time. We're going to hear something outside, and it's going to be like, oh man, is that a car alarm? What is that? Oh no, you know what it is? I think they're doing construction. Are they doing construction? No. Maybe that's my neighbor's burglar alarm. Wait, it's not going off though. Why isn't it going off? We're going to go outside, and it's going to be the great shofar blast of Mashiach. And there's a conversation between two Rebbes, and I forgot which are the names of the Rebbes, but one of the Rebbes says to the other Rebbe, these are some of the most famous Rebbes, two of the Rebbes, and says, when Mashiach comes, it's going to be a day just like today. We're going to come home for work, we're going to daven Mariv, going to eat dinner, we're going to go to bed, and then we're going to hear the shofar blast. And we're going to go to the window, and it's going to be that Mashiach comes. that Mashiach is here. And the other person says, the other Rebbe said, you know something? I think it's going to be a little bit different than what you just said. It's going to be a day just like today. We're going to come home from work. We're going to daven Mariv. We're going to eat dinner. We're going to go to bed. But that night, we're not going to be able to fall asleep. And then we're going to go to the window, and we're going to see that Mashiach has come. You see, think about it this way. Think about it this way. Think about it on an artistic level. Because the greatest artist is God. Would the greatest artist in the world start an art project and then go, good enough? Is that even conceivable? Or would the greatest artist in the world, not finish it until it was absolutely to the ability of what that artist was capable of? You know, the Gemara calls God an artist. God is the greatest artist. Do you think God would make the most magnificent thing in the world, the universe itself, which he's made out of the Torah, which is like the most incredible thing, and then just go at a certain point, there's still death, there's still hatred, there's still war, good enough, good enough. Is that even conceivable? What I'm asking you to do is approach the subject of Mashiach from a level of aesthetics, not from a level of emunah, just from a level of the logic of art, of beauty, of aesthetics. Just approach it from that standpoint, and you realize it can't be otherwise, that the universe, which is the most magnificent, by far, nothing even comes close to the beauty of the universe. How could it be that the universe wouldn't be fully finished? It's impossible. It's impossible. It's impossible. I tell you, I think maybe we have time maybe for one more story.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
27.
When my mother was at the end of her life, she was in New York. It was a hospice situation. She was in our apartment on 79th and Broadway on the west side in New York City where I grew up. I was flying from LA to New York as much as I could, just to see her. And I remember I had my sitter out just to daven Maruv at the airport and to say Tefillah Sederach, and I put it in the pouch in front of my seat, and it had been a gift to me. A good buddy of mine had gotten married, and there were four of us who held up his chuppah, and as a gift to the four of us, he gave us the Art Scroll Daily Siddur with our names on it. So that's what it was. I had had it for years already, and anyway, I left it on the airplane. And okay. It is what it is. 1 year later, I'm at Yik Friday night, and someone comes up to me and says, "Are you David Sachs?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "My wife has your sitter." He said, "She found it on the plane. We've been meaning to give it back to you." He said, "Well, wait right here. I don't want to forget." So he ran home and he got it. And to this day, I have it. I had replaced it with an identical one. I had gotten a little frummer. That one said David Sachs. This one says David Yitzchak. So the one in my sitter that I use to this day for morning davening in my talis bag is the replacement one. But the one I daven bedtime Kriya Shema is that one. So I still use it every day, So why am I telling you this story? Because I knew in my kishkas I was going to get it back. Why? Because I had put so much of my life force into it. You know what I mean? You know, when you hold a prayer book and you daven with a prayer book on a regular basis, your kishka's going to it, you know? And so I knew I was going to get it back. So can you imagine the Jewish people, how much of our kishkas have gone into this world? Into the fabric of time and space? You think that, I mean, like, forwarding it toward the end, forwarding it toward perfection. It's happening around us. It's happening around us. It's absolutely happening around us. So you're never alone. You're never alone. You're never alone. Don't permit yourself the luxury of thinking you're alone. And don't permit yourself the luxury, if you can help it, of getting down. You know, there's all sorts of getting down. There's clinical depression. I'm not talking about clinical depression right now. I'm just talking about just the everyday kind of like, I'm in a bad mood, or I'm just sort of kind of giving up. I caught myself one time. I'm going to tell you the visual that came to me. I wasn't even thinking about it. Just in the moment it came to me. I started, it's true what they say. Like when you're your body really does express your moods. And when your head hangs low like that, it's usually because you've kind of given up a little bit, you know? And in the moment, I saw myself giving up in the moment in real time, and I saw my head starting to hang low, and I imagined a piece of pork hanging around my neck. And I said, you know what? If you give into this sadness right now, and again, I'm not talking about clinical depression right now. That's a separate category. I'm just talking about everyday kind of like bad mood giving up. I said, it's like you're taking a bite of that pork right now. There's like almost, look, rabbis will tell you, like, one thing is one thing, another thing is another thing. Okay, I don't want to take it too far. But depression does lead to averas. And so the analogy is closer than you might think. All right, Chevra, that's the end of the talk. Our time is up.